This is All India Radio. In the program Money Talk, now we bring you a discussion on record GST collections in April 2023. The participants are Sharad Kohli, Economic Analyst, and Anubha Rohatgi, AIR Correspondent. The Goods and Services Tax or the GST collection for the month of April 2023 has been the highest ever. At 1.87 lakh crore rupees, the revenue is 12% higher than the GST collection in the same month last year. To discuss more about this issue, we are joined by Economic Analyst Sharad Kohli. Mr. Kohli, financial year 2023-24 has started on a great note on the economic front. For the first time ever since the rollout of GST in 2017, the gross collection has crossed the 1.87 lakh crore rupees mark. What are the factors that have contributed to this highest ever figure?
If we talk in brief, and I give a very, very short answer to that, of course I'm going to elaborate on that. It clearly shows the buoyancy of the Indian economy. Because GST being an indirect tax, I think is clearly reflective of the fact that goods and services being sold in the country are, at a very, very decent level. We all know, whereas the contribution to direct taxes being done by a few people. We've got about 7 crore tax returns being filed, about 1.5 to 2 crores people actually paying direct taxes, whereas indirect tax, which is the GST, which came up in 2017 after integrating about 17, 18 different taxes, is practically being paid by every single citizen of the country. Even a newborn baby pays. So I think the numbers are extremely encouraging. 1.87 lakh crore was never heard for the last almost 6 years since the tax was launched. But there is one aspect which I would like to mention, which I'm sure the All India Radio listeners would like to know. That when we talk of tax collections of a particular month, so when we talk of tax collections for the month of April, we are basically talking of tax collections for the month of March, because what happens, the way GST functions is that when you finish the month, you get about 20 days to file your Form 3B, which is your tax return for that month, where you, by an online system, you inform the government or the GST portal that how much are the sales you've made, what is the input tax credit you've claimed, how much were your, interstate billings, how much were your intrastate billings, how much were your IGST. We all know that GST has got components.
Yes.
One is the SGST, one is the CGST, and the third is called the IGST, the state GST, the central GST, and the integrated GST. So whenever we get the GST numbers or GST collection for a particular month, it always comprises of these three aspects. And of course, there's a fourth one as well, which is called the cess, which is levied over and above the GST on sin goods and some of the luxury goods. Even the collection for that has been over 12,000 crores. That is, even cess has been, a very, very significant amount which has been collected. So basically, when we count April, we are talking for the collection for the month of March. And one of the reasons why the collection has been higher, although we've had March earlier also, so I may not be very justified if I say that just because it was March, because there have been Marches before as well. There was a March 21, there was a March 2020, there was a March 19, there was a March 18. But principally speaking, the month of March is when the businesses close their books of accounts. So what happens is that the adjustments or pending billings which the businesses do, they try and wrap it up in the month of March. So some part of this, encouraging collection is also because of, the fact that the books of accounts were closing and the businesses were completing their invoicing wherever there was a pending invoice or a pending billing with regard to a good, with regard to a service or with regard to goods or merchandise. They had to finish their billing. So that was one reason. And another very important aspect, Anubha, which I must mention here is that when we talk of the breakup of GST into the 3 or 4 components that I spoke of, one of the components is called the IGST, which is the Integrated Goods and Services. Now, this is basically done when you're making an interstate sale and also being collected on the imports being done in the country. So out of the, I would say 80,000 plus crore or 89,000 crores rather of IGST, which is part of the 1,87,000 crores, is 34,000 crore of imports. So which also shows that our imports have been at a very decent level, which has still been importing quite a bit. From a certain perspective, it may not be very encouraging. From a certain perspective, it may be encouraging because we are importing, because we are able to consume those raw materials, we are able to consume those finished products, and so on and so forth. So I think the listeners need to understand the components of GST, which is why I elaborated on this, Anubha.
Of course, we were talking about the factors that have led to this highest ever figure. And like you said, there are a lot of factors. And one of the factors that is being talked about is ensuring better compliance. Now, we've been seeing a steady rise in GST collections for quite some time now. And Prime Minister Modi has also lauded the record mop-up, saying that this shows the success of how GST has increased integration and compliance. You talked about, of course, integration, but I want to know how important have the government's efforts to ensure better compliance been, and how have these been achieved?
Well, we all know when GST came initially, there were some teething troubles with regard to the GST portal, the online compliance system, or the way GST was being collected, deposited, the way returns were being filed, then the returns were simplified. Then, composition scheme was introduced. I mean, GST has been evolving, I would say, from 1st of July 2017 when it was implemented. It has been a process of evolution, and why not? Because one of the biggest fiscal, I would say, reform carried out in the country since independence. I mean, this was very, very big. It's not easy for a country like India with 1.42 billion plus people, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from northeast to the run of Kutch in Gujarat. It was never easy to implement, and with India following a federal system where the states have certain independence, it was a very, very tough call to make, and the government took that bold step. And obviously there were some teething troubles in the beginning, but then I think I must put on record my appreciation for the GST Council and the GST overall portal management, which is being done as a PPP model, public-private partnership model. There is a private IT company involved, and of course there is a GST commissionerate which is involved, where we've got different GST officials and different hierarchy. So I must put on record my appreciation, because they have been very responsive. Every time, the taxpayers or the dealers who have come out with problems, so the problems have been brought to the table, and they have been immediately resolved, and which is what has led to simplification of GST as with the flux of time over the last 5 or 6 years. So I think that has led to improvement in compliance. And when we talk of compliance, we are also talking of formalization of the economy, Anubha, which is very important to mention here, because selling goods and services without bills in this country was considered as normal before GST came. I mean, when you used to go to a shopkeeper, he used to say, "Aapko bill lena hai, aapko bill nahi lena hai." This was a very common thing, and I think this is what was nurturing the black economy also, the parallel economy, or black money if we talk in the normal terms. So I think GST system is such that a dealer cannot afford to keep away for a very long time, because he is part of the entire supply chain, to who he is selling, to who he is buying. So, you cannot keep yourself away or keep your billing away from this chain, because, the system has been built in such a manner. I think that has led to formalization of the economy, and this formalization coupled with, I would say, plugging of the loopholes in the direct taxes, in the income tax, I think they have significantly helped in the compliance which you just spoke about, and which is one of the major reasons why, the collections have been growing, and we noticed record collections in the month of April for March, I would say, because we understand this technically. So I would always clarify this, that collections for the month of April pertaining to the month of March, that's how we should understand. Yes, definitely compliance has played a big role, and I think formalization of economy is an ongoing process. India still has certain part of the economy which needs to be formalized, and I think with the flux of time, we would see more and more registrations happening. Today the number of registrations have probably crossed more than 1.3 crores, if I'm not wrong. Maybe I may be lagging in the data, but the registrations are growing by leaps and bounds as compared to, I remember when GST started in the first few months, or rather a year or two, there were hardly 60 to 65 lakh registrations. Today, the number of registrations have more than doubled. So which means that apart from the new businesses and startups, Anubha, there have been people who were never registered under the earlier VAT regime or the sales tax regime or whatever. They are now compelled to register under GST, and not that they regret this, because they are reaping the benefits of GST, because they can take the benefit of the input tax credit. They end up saving a lot of money. Plus, they are able to get newer customers, bigger companies, especially the MSME sector, which is a substantial part of our economy. I think they have been the most beneficiaries. I keep meeting a lot of MSMEs, Anubha, who tell me that, yes, initially GST had teething trouble, but today we are much happier than before 2017. So I think compliance, coupled with more collection, coupled with buoyancy in the economy, has led to this extraordinary collection, Anubha.
You just mentioned the benefit the GST has for the businesses, and that is what I was coming to next, because a rise in GST essentially means more revenue for the government, both for the central as well as the state governments. But you've just expanded on the benefits it has for the businesses, but how does it benefit the common man, the consumer?
Well, the consumer, I think it brings in more transparency. As I said before 2017, a customer walking into a shop, and I'm sure, you must have heard this at some point, where the shopkeeper used to say, Madam, bill lena hai ki nahi lena? Bill lena hai to itne ka milega, bill nahi lena hai to itne ka milega. I think this was a very common thing and it was considered normal, very surprisingly. Today, if you walk into a shop, you will not get to hear this because if we understand this technically, if a merchandiser or if a shopkeeper tries to sell without drawing up an invoice, which is called a tax invoice in the technical jargon of GST. If you try doing that, what happens? Because you've already bought it on a GST scale. Either you've sourced your raw material or you've sourced your finished product from the previous supplier, sourced it after paying GST. Now, if you don't sell it on GST or if you don't write up an invoice in simpler terms, you will end up being a loser because the GST which you have paid on your sourcing, you will not be able to offset that against the collection you've made, which is called, again in the technical language of GST, it's called the input tax credit, ITC. So I think the whole mechanism and the whole system has been made in a manner where consumers now feel more transparency. When they go and buy, they know that their invoice is going to contain two things. There's going to be half of SGST. There's going to be half of GST. Everybody knows that if I'm buying an item which is worth 18% GST, it'll have 9% SGST, 9% CGST. Apart from this, a very important piece of data, Anubha, which I would like to highlight here is that there are e-way bills. As the goods move under the GST regime, you're supposed to generate an e-way bill, which is attached with the transport. There was those days when they were check posts, they were called, and the trucks and the transport vehicles used to be stopped there for hours together. There are no check posts today. There is seamless movement, intrastate. All you need is to generate an electronically processed e-way bill, and you carry that e-way bill number in a soft form. You don't even need a printout of that. Just carry the e-way bill, and if you look at the e-way bill numbers, Anubha, 9 crore e-way bills have been generated, which itself speaks volumes about the fact that how much of growth we are noticing in the logistics, when the goods are moving from one place to the other. That is what ultimately results in sales. The goods have to be moved. So I think all in all, if you look at the numbers in totality, look at IGST, SGST, CGST, e-way bills, look at the import, it speaks of an all-round growth in the country's economy, not just on a single front.
If the GST collections continue to rise, and by all accounts they would continue to rise, as we've been seeing for the last almost a year now 2 lakh crores is probably the next target. So do you think the GST Council may reduce some taxes in case inflation persists?
Well, we should not forget, Anubha, that country has undertaken and initiated a massive infrastructure investment by itself. 100 lakh crore plus of infrastructure initiative which has been taken, the NIP as it's called, the National Infrastructure Plan. The fact of the matter is, funds are needed for development of the country. Yes, we have today 5 or 6 GST rates. Well, there have been discussions and deliberations on reducing the number of rates because I remember the opposition pointing out to the government that it was supposed to be one country, one tax, but we now have 5 rates or 6 rates. One of the earlier finance ministers said that we cannot tax Hawaii Chappal and the aeroplane at the same rate, because nature of consumers, the class of consumers, the propensity to pay is different in both the cases. So we got to have these varying rates. But yes, there has been talk of integrating 12% and 18% rate. Yes, maybe going forward, Anubha, I have a feeling that the 12% and the 18% category may get integrated into a 15% category. But you're right. More the collection. We all know that when the compliance with regard to any kind of taxes, whether direct or indirect, rises and the tax collection grows, it obviously gives that elbow room to the government to probably reduce the tax, which encourages more people to pay tax. Whether indirect tax, we all know that the incidence of tax is not on the person on who's collecting the tax. Ultimately the tax is paid by the consumer. The business is only an intermediary. So I think keeping that in mind and keeping the multiple projects and initiatives which government has taken on the front of developing infrastructure and even otherwise, there are a lot of welfare schemes going on. Funds are needed. As far as I'm concerned, my advice to the consumers, to the people, to the dealers is that by paying GST, every single rupee of GST, you are contributing to the development of the country. You are contributing to the growth of the country. So from that perspective, I don't think people should complain. But yes, as a populist measure or as a measure where you want to reduce the burden of taxes on people, it will provide elbow room to the government to reduce the taxes going forward. Obviously, if we hit the 2 lakh crore benchmark, we'll have to wait and see. We need to keep in mind the fact that GST is regulated by GST Council, which is a classic example of cooperative federalism where all the state finance ministers, they sit together along with the finance minister of the country, the union finance minister. They sit and take a decision. So it's a very, very unique model which has never been witnessed in this country before. So I think the GST Council will ultimately take a call at some point while looking at the fiscal health of the country, Anubha, going forward.
Thank you so much for speaking with us, Mr. Kohli.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on record GST collections in April 2023. The participants were Sharad Kohli, Economic Analyst, and Anubha Rohatgi, AIR Correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official.